My name is Jessie Ace. I'm part of a group of enabled warriors that you've probably never heard of. We're fighting back against our invisible illness and taking the dis out of disability. We don't give sympathy to our symptoms. They enable us to be the warrior that we are. If you ask doctors and nurses, they'd say what we're doing is impossible. But pushing the limits of our conditions is something that we have to break through every single day. See, we push the limits. We are mentally strong, and we can do anything. The question is, how far can we push those limits? This podcast will give you the answers. I'm Jessie Ace, and this is the Disabled to Enabled podcast. Hey Enabled Warriors! Today on the show we have someone absolutely phenomenal. You will never believe who we've got as a guest, Mr. Nick Mobley. So excited!
Hi there. Hello there, everyone.
So in case you don't know, Nick is the new CEO of the MS Society. He's come from a good background being CEO at the King's College Hospital NHS Foundation Trust, and he was also CEO at the Royal Surrey County Hospital NHS Foundation Trust as well. So this is the first time that we've had a CEO from the background of the NHS, which is really, really exciting. So thank you so much for joining us, Nick. It's amazing.
Yeah, well, real pleasure. Lovely to be with you today. Looking forward to it.
We're so excited to find out a bit more about you as well. So can you start off by telling us, who you are, what you do day to day?
Yeah, of course. So I'm the Chief Executive at the MS Society, and I started that in January, which was a really great honour. I'm so pleased to be involved. And I've been CEO of the MS Society. It's quite a varied role, actually. So first and foremost, there's a big thing that's important, which is getting out and about, meeting people in the MS community, meeting our wonderful volunteers, working with our councils, who are the national volunteer bodies who really help us understand what's going on. So that's all about really connecting with the community, understanding what people's needs and priorities are, how we can best serve them. So that's very important. There's another chunk of the role which is about working with other partner organisations who are trying to help the MS community, people like the MS Trust, for example, and really working out how we can best sort of join forces and work together in the interest of the community. So that's very important. And then there's a big bit which is much more about the kind of technical management task, if you like. It's quite a complex organisation trying to do a lot of things. So there's a big task of really helping all our great staff break through barriers, deliver what they want to deliver, make sure things are being people don't cut across each other. And I'm, as CEO, I get very heavily involved in that, working with a wonderful executive team. So in a nutshell, that's it.
So in a nutshell, you're a very busy guy.
Well, it is, funny you should say. It is quite busy, but it's all really important work, and it's such fun as well. I'm really, really enjoying it. So it feels like we're doing good work. We're trying to make a difference and an impact. So that's great. Don't mind being busy in those circumstances.
That's fabulous. It's always good to be busy, I think.
Yeah, no, indeed. Well, I've got a very low boredom threshold, so if I'm not,
you're not one for sitting still.
No.
Neither am I. I'm coming. So for the interview today, Nick, I did something slightly different, and I actually reached out to the MS community themselves into Facebook groups and the things like the online social media, like Shift MS and I can't remember the other one, the MS Trust. And I actually asked our community what they would like to ask you. So all the questions today are kind of based around what people have asked and things. So we've got really, really interesting questions today.
Sounds great. Looking forward to it.
So our first kind of question is, can you tell us why you were interested in becoming a CEO of various hospitals as well as the MS Society in the first place? Like, what got you interested in that?
Yeah, of course. Well, the thing to understand about me is I come from a really sort of public service background. So my dad was a diplomat, but more relevantly, my mum was a doctor. She was, in fact, one of the first cohort of women doctors to be trained at George's Medical School back in the day in the century. I've got lots of doctors in the family. My wife, Margaret, is a rheumatologist working at Chelsea and Westminster in London. So healthcare and medicine are really in the family. Now, I'm not clinically trained myself, so that wasn't an option open to me. But I've been involved in policy and general management for a long while. When the opportunity came up to use my skills in an NHS context, which happened about 15 years ago when I first went to King's, I just was really excited about that. It felt like the things I knew might really be able to help in what is an incredibly important area of work. So, I was joined the NHS and had 15 absolutely brilliant years working what's a great national institution. Real privilege.
Oh, that's amazing. I love the fact that you've got so many doctors and things around you, and you were just like, I'm not medically trained, so I'm just going to be your boss and just like own everything.
That's right. I hate definitely the way to go. I hate being told what to do. So,
I'm with you on that one. Definitely with you on that one. Yeah. So what are you hoping to really bring to the MS Society now that you're CEO?
Yeah, well, I suppose three things really. I mean, the first thing, and most importantly, what I'm bringing is my commitment, my passion, my real desire to make a difference for people. And I hope that will shine through in terms of how I work with the community and how the organisation feels. But I suppose more specifically, if you're asking about me and what I can bring to the party, obviously I've had 15 years in the NHS, which gives me a really deep insight into how clinical care works in the UK, and actually at King's, which was a very research active organisation, but a really good insight into the clinical research world, which obviously connects very closely with big hospitals. The other thing I'd say is that I've got a lot of what you call general management experience. So having done these roles in the NHS, and prior to the NHS, I did quite a time in the private sector, actually, not least for management consultancy called McKinsey, which you may or may not have heard of. That's given me quite a good sort of management toolkit, which I think is relevant to helping the MS Society really be effective in working for the community. And I'm particularly interested, the thing that I enjoy is thinking about how we can improve and change and transform and move things forward. So it's that kind of mindset I bring as well.
I love that. I love that mindset of like, what can we change? Let's really do this and like make it awesome.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the spirit we're approaching the task.
Amazing. So what plans do you have for helping young people in particular affected by MS?
Well, I think this is an area where we've got to do a lot more. And I suppose if there's a thought about the MS Society, if you'll indulge me, it's an organisation that's really, really connected to the community. And at a broad level, I think we have a really good insight and understanding in terms of what matters to the community, and we really try and build our plans on that basis. But the truth is, when you get to the kind of elements of the community, the MS community is very diverse, isn't it? And you've got lots of people, very different backgrounds, life stages, and indeed their MS is, different in nature. And I think we've got to really dig into that and understand, not just at an overall level, but at an individual bit of the community, what the needs and priorities are. And that absolutely applies for young people. So, I think we already do important stuff, whether it's in terms of research or information or services and support, or indeed campaigning, which are relevant to young people. But I think we've got to get much closer to what young people need and want, and how we can help them. So, in a sense, I'd like to kind of throw back a question, if I may.
Absolutely.
We'd like to hear from you and your listeners what it is that you think is important, and how we can better help you and connect with you, such that we can do a good job for you as well as other parts of the community.
Brilliant. Okay. So listeners, if you're listening and you've got an answer to that, please comment on the podcast, and I will forward all those to Nick as well.
Brilliant. And seriously, we'd really appreciate it. And it's a great time to be doing it, Jessie, because we're literally just thinking we've come to the end of a 5-year strategy, as they call it, sort of big long-term plan. And we're thinking about our next 5 years. So this is the time to feed in your thoughts so we can really get those into the mix, which would be brilliant.
Brilliant. Okay, so we've now really got like a platform where we can go, right, okay, this is what we need to do, kind of thing.
Absolutely, and we'd love to hear that.
That's amazing. So I've actually got a meeting next week with the lady that runs all of the MS groups around me.
Yeah.
So we're going to put a workshop together of how we can help young people better, and how those groups can attract more young people as well.
Well, that's absolutely fantastic. Yeah, so that's exactly it. I mean, we need to be doing a really brilliant job for young people, and getting that kind of input is going to be so valuable. We'll really be able to think about how we can respond to it well.
That's amazing. So hopefully that will be something that we can work on together, which would be really cool.
Mm.
So, what do you think you're going to do differently to the previous CEO, Michelle Mitchell?
Well, Michelle was great. She was a really good CEO, very much like within the organisation, actually very well respected around the community and, you know, in the broader sector. So she did a great job. And I think what she did was she left the MS Society in generally very good shape, and I think pointed in the right direction. So very clearly pointed at the MS community and making a broad-based offer of support to the MS community. So a big focus on research, big focus on information services and support, grants and so on. A lot about bring the community together and about campaigning. And actually all of those things absolutely still hold good. So in terms of the basic direction in which we're pointed and the kinds of things we're going to offer, it's going to be quite consistent. But within that, I actually think there's going to be a need for really big change. Just to highlight 3 areas where I think we're going to need to do things a bit differently, just very quickly. The first is, and it really goes back to the point I was just making, I think we need to really understand and connect with all parts of the community in a much more sort of sensitive and thoughtful way. And that then needs to reflect back in the kinds of services, support, and that we can offer and things we can do to help all parts of the community. So that's one thing. And actually, that's quite a big deal from where we are now. Mm-hmm. Second thing where I think we could do a lot more is actually in terms of clinical quality, which is very patchy, as we all know, across the country. And we've really got to get some traction on that. And I think there's some very interesting ways in which we can work with clinical professionals to help raise standards. And of course, there's a very important kind of campaigning element to that as well, which we can talk about later on maybe. And the third thing, which I think needs to be different, is that, you know, the world is moving on. We're in a very sort of empowered, activist, digitally enabled world. And I think that means we need to really focus on how we can help people connect. We can help build a sense of community, and we can also support people in raising their voices on the things that matter to them. So I think we've got to kind of change our style, the way we engage with the community, how we draw people together, how we provide the tools and the platform to allow people to make their voices heard loud and clear, locally and nationally. So those are quite big changes, actually. And then if you think about what that means for us as an organisation, well, actually, that means we have to change a lot as well. We've got to kind of get better and more responsive. We've got to, you know, when we've got a great new idea, say for young people, we've got to be able to bring that through much more quickly. We find that quite difficult sometimes. We've got to get much better at digital. We've got to be much better about how we connect and engage with people. What in the business world would be called kind of marketing, I suppose. But it's really about connection, you know, looking at how we connect with people. And we've got to get better at partnerships. We've got to really focus on diversity, both in our organisation, reaching out. So there's a lot of change for us as an organisation if we're to do what we do.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the social connection is one of the biggest things, to be honest. Because I mean, like when I was trying to find even the groups in my local area, trying to find those on the MS Society website was really, really difficult.
Yeah, well, do you know, it's really interesting that you say that, because there was, and it's a kind of little vignette of how we can be different. Because actually, I gather at one point we did have a sort of section of our website which listed out various services in local areas. But the way we did it was we wanted to make sure that it was all right, the quality was good, it was, you know, kind of proper things that we were referencing. So that was quite a lot of work internally. We didn't actually have the resource to do that. So our response at that point was to say, well, we better stop doing that. In fact, I think that was, you know, in the new world, that's not the right response. I think we on our website need to be allowing, you know, maybe on more of a Wikipedia-like basis, enabling people to kind of list their services, people to rate the services or whatever, in a way that draws people together. We absolutely need to be helping people connect and understand what's sort of out there. So that would be just a little example of how really quite quickly I think we can change. And
absolutely, because it's you know, as a young person, you would tend to Google things, you know, and if it doesn't come up, then just, you know, you can't find it, basically.
Yeah.
So,
no, absolutely. And life's too short, isn't it? You want to be able to find things.
Yeah, we want things now.
No, absolutely.
Yeah. So you seem to have like a big interest in neurological conditions in particular. Now, where does that kind of come from? Do you have a personal connection to someone with MS, maybe, or?
Yeah. No. No. It's a really good question. It's one that's often asked. Now, unlike, in fact, many, I would say, even maybe most people within the MS Society, I actually don't have a direct link to MS. But I suppose the things that drew me to where I am now is in part the real passion for healthcare, which I've talked about. It's also worth saying that at King's is one of the big neurological centres, neurosciences centres nationally, and I'll be chief executive there. I saw firsthand the absolutely devastating impact that progressive neurological conditions like MS can have, not only on the people who have the condition, but actually on their nearest and dearest, their families, their friends, the people who care for them. And that really made an impression on me. And the other thing to say is that when you're working in the NHS, you work alongside a lot of really great charities. And what you begin to realize is, the NHS is brilliant at thinking about the episode of clinical care, but then there's the whole of the rest of a person's life that's going on. And actually, what charities do is they think about the person as a whole, and they try to find ways in which they can support the person as a whole, not just in terms of that little clinical episode. It's what hospitals really see. So thinking about perhaps moving outside of the NHS, it was just, I was so thrilled and delighted when this opportunity came up. Really honoured to be given the chance to serve as CEO. So, huge privilege, and I'm really delighted to be here.
That's amazing, and we're really delighted to have you, to be honest. So it's
Thank you.
To work both ways. But yeah, I completely agree. So how do you feel about the way that diagnosis happens at the moment, and how could we improve that, do you think?
Well, it's a really important area. It sort of links back to what we were talking about earlier, Jesse. So, I mean, the first thing to say and acknowledge is that MS is a pretty complex condition, and obviously in very different ways. And that does really create problems in terms of diagnosis and huge stress, obviously, for people going through that process of diagnosis. But it's actually also really difficult for, jobbing clinicians on the front lines to know enough about MS to recognize the signs, to sort of start the diagnostic process. So there genuinely is a kind of dilemma there. No, sadly, is that actually people's experience across the country is very, very variable. So in some cases where you have switched on GPs and a great sort of backup specialist neurological centre, you may get very effective and appropriate diagnosis, but that absolutely doesn't apply across the country in every part of the world. So the things we need to focus on are obviously upskilling GPs so they really know and understand about MS, so they can trigger appropriate onward referrals. We need to focus on making sure that there's really good neurological centres appropriately staffed, so that when that process is started, the process of diagnosis in the centre can happen quickly, and there's enough diagnostics such as MRI available, and of course that there's appropriate support wrapped around the consultant to who can really provide support and backup for people going through what's an incredibly stressful time. So MS Nurse is obviously critical. There'd be really good signposting as well to the voluntary sector organisations such as ourselves and the MS Trust, and really then provide further help and support. And I suppose the things that I would say are in terms. So there's a big need and an opportunity, I think, to help things get better. And I think we can certainly play a role in that. So we're thinking very much about how we can work with the clinical community to understand what good looks like and help them assess themselves and raise standards across the country. And I'm delighted to say we're hoping to be working very closely with the MS Trust on that. So it's a good kind of opportunity to be collaborative. But of course, it's also important to say that campaigning plays a big part in this. So if you're in an area where actually services aren't up to scratch, it's really important that people with MS actually make their voices heard on that. And I think we can help with that. We can provide support to people with MS to make that case locally, which is really, really important. The other thing to say is that we do quite a lot of national campaigning on issues to do with clinical care and treatment, which you'll be aware of. So some big campaigns focusing more generally on access to drugs, regular reviews, information, and so forth. And I think together with the community, we can continue to kind of put pressure on at national level so people realise just how important MS is.
Yeah, absolutely. And we need to start making governments listen. I think that's a crucial one. because I think the thing that's affecting the MS community at the moment is there's a lot of talk about the PIP and the 20-meter rule.
Yeah.
Which is just, it's a ridiculous rule, to be honest. It's a ridiculous rule.
Yeah. No, sorry, I've interrupted.
It's fine.
Yeah. No, I was going to say, I completely agree with you. And it's, obviously the community's campaigning hard on that. We're campaigning hard on that. I think we can make some progress. We're going to try and keep up the pressure as the latest comprehensive spending review comes through in the autumn. We really want to campaign on that. But of course, alongside that, we've got to make our voice heard, as we talked about, on these issues of clinical quality as well, where actually I think we can do we can really make some progress if we work closely with the profession and we keep campaigning hard.
Fabulous. That's good to know. That's good to know. Just going back to what you're saying about MS nurses in particular, is there because I know there's a lot of MS nurses, especially around this area in the East Midlands, where MS nurses are very stretched thin, and there is literally one for the whole of the county sometimes. Is there any plans that is there anything that we can change to get more MS nurses available?
Yeah, well, I think there is. So you're quite right. If you look across the country, it's very variable, and oftentimes there just simply isn't enough capacity there, which is a real worry. I think as we start to work, it sort of starts with what I was saying before, and we're going to do this with the MS Trust. But the first thing is to, as it were, define what a great pathway of care for MS looks like and what the standards associated with that pathway are. And one of the key elements that we'd want to be testing in that is there enough MS nurse capacity available? What we then want to do is we want to create a program of what you call audit. It sort of sounds a bit boring, but the idea is we want to be able to kind of assess and then play back very publicly where MS services in the regions are in terms of whether or not they're meeting the standards, including availability of MS nurses. And then where there are gaps, what we can do is we can help those services make the case to their local NHS providers that actually MS nurses are not only clinically really important, but actually probably also save the NHS money in the longer term. So I think a lot we can do to make the case, and I think if we work with the MS Trust, who've got great expertise in this area, we'll really, I hope, be able to make some headway. So it's one of the kind of critical issues. Got to keep a focus on it, and I think it can be sort of seen in that kind of broader context of really pushing the case for clinical quality nationally.
Fabulous. That's fabulous to know. And I think that's the best thing about you having a NHS background as well, is that you kind of know how it works, and you can
well, certainly, it's interesting for my sins having been in there and understanding politics and dynamics of it. You have to be quite thoughtful because it's just this gargantuan organisation. Of course, it's regionalising, so that makes it more difficult to work out how you get kind of traction across the country. It's a big bureaucracy. It's very worried about money. So working out what the kind of tactics are of making progress is quite tricky. And I hope I can bring something to the party there.
I think you'll be able to. I really do. Yeah. So how is funding normally allocated between, say, research and drug therapies and things like that? So are there allocations for holistic therapies like exercise and diet and that kind of, to help with the mentality of actually being diagnosed with MS?
Yeah, well, let me kind of explain how it works, and I'll come back to the specific answer. So the way we start off is we take a 5-year view as to what's important for the MS community and what we need to achieve, the impact we need to have. And that process, which was last done 5 years ago, and we're going through that process now, is very much built on what the needs and the priorities of the community are, what they tell us their needs are, what matters to them. So it's, what we're trying to do is to reflect back what people tell us is important to them. So it starts off at that level. And that strategy is approved by the board. And then there's a what's called the business planning process, where year by year we work out if we know where we want to be in 5 years' time, what are we going to do this coming year, as it were, to get us along the track, and how are we going to use our very precious resource to help achieve that. And again, that goes back to the board and is approved by the board. But the aim is that everything we spend, it really reflects what people in the community are telling us is important. Now, how that works in practice, how the money shakes out in practice, is you've got, in terms of the sort of 21 million, something like that, 22 million that we spend directly on support for the MS community year by year. About 6 million goes to research, about 10 million broadly to information, services and support of one sort or another. And then there's about another 6 million which is focused on campaigning and helping to build community. So that's roughly how the money sort of splits out. Now, in terms of how that would then translate into things that would be perhaps important to some of your listeners. So in terms of things like diet and exercise, we already have a lot of information resources focused on those kinds of areas, and we think that diet and exercise are very important, and we're running a number of really interesting programs of work, particularly on the exercise side, to help promote healthy lifestyles and exercise as a contribution to living well with MS. And we've got a really exciting program underway in Wales, for example, in that area. So it's very much part of the thinking, and it's we're really going to try and focus on that in the future as well. On the research side, the way we focus our money, again, we've got some research priorities which were developed on the basis of really extensive conversation of people with MS and also the sort of clinical research community. And broadly speaking, the focus of that is in the sort of hard science that's needed to really understand MS, and in particular progression, which is the area that we were less far advanced on. And there's some very exciting work nationally and internationally focused on that. We're very much focused now on seeing if we can create the infrastructure which will enable us to run clinical trials much, much more quickly. So we've got a promising molecule that might translate into a treatment. We've really got to kind of compress the clinical trials process, which can take years and years and years, such we can get treatments through to people much quicker. And of course, we're very interested on behalf of the community in risk factors that contribute to MS, which ultimately will give us a platform for thinking about and understanding how we can prevent MS in the slightly longer term. So those are really where we're focused at the moment.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah, that's really good to know. So thank you so much for going into that as well, and just kind of giving like a really, really good in-depth answer. That's amazing. Okay, so final question before we go on to the super quick secrets round, which I explained to you became one, which is the round that everybody wants to know. Before we get to that, how do you think invisible disability is viewed by the general public? And how, as a community of warriors, do you think we could be changing those views?
Yeah, well, it's a real problem. And of course, particularly with World MS Day and so forth, it's right sort of up there. And the truth, I don't need to tell you this, is that MS has such huge impacts on people, but it's not always visible, is it? And actually, that's particularly the case for young people with MS, who often, to all intents and purposes, look very healthy externally, albeit they've got really serious things to contend with inside. We know from research that actually a lot of people, and actually it's a particular problem for young women, face really significant prejudice because of their condition, and that the levels of understanding and awareness simply aren't there. So we've got a big job to do, I think, in terms of raising awareness of MS in society at large, and in particular actually with employers and with people working in public services who frankly often aren't as well versed in what MS means as they should be. And there's stuff I think that we can do as the MS Society in terms of trying to mobilize campaigns, really raise awareness, do all the sort of PR that will keep this at the top of the agenda. But of course, it's not just about the charity, it's really about the community making its presence felt. Of course, celebrities such as Selma Blair, that was a great moment where we really, kind of caught the public attention. And if we can do more of that, that's really helpful. But I think it's about everyone in the community seeking to raise awareness at any possible moment, lending their voice to the big campaigns, but making our collective voice heard. So I think it's about a partnership between us all with the absolute focus on making people understand, because at the moment it's just not great.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think sometimes it's to do with as well with the confidence of the individual to be actual to actually be able to tell other people about their condition and have that confidence to go, yeah, no, I'm not normal. I look normal, but I'm not actually normal. Um,
Yeah.
and
Yeah, no,
accepting that you are different from somebody else, I think it's a huge thing.
yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. It's really important that people understand that. But that, I think that, hopefully we can really empower people such they feel confident to make those kinds of messages on a public basis.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So for masses that are listening, or anybody that's listening, really, I mean, how can they get more involved with the society? How can they have a say in if they have a problem or anything?
So, well, we're absolutely there. You can Google us on the web. The website is there. There's loads of opportunities to get involved, whether you want kind of formal involvement, becoming a member, or you'd like to volunteer, or you just simply want to connect with some of our services, the advice we offer through Helpline, for example, or some of our local groups, or there's some online fora and so forth. So there's loads of ways in which you can connect, and you would all be very, very welcome. We're really keen to establish that connection. Hopefully, build a relationship over time as well. So please do come and find us, and we're going to be thinking about how we can come and find you too as well. That's our new strategy.
Okay. Okay, so Enabled Warriors, this is the part of the show where we find out a little bit more about the personality of our guests, and we ask the questions that you really want to know, and you really want to put towards the CEO of the MS Society, of course. So are you ready for this, Nick?
Do my best.
Okay, what is the most inspiring book that you've ever read?
Well, I'm going to give you two, if I may. So one, my favourite book of all time is The Unbearable Lightness of Being, which is just a wonderful story about love and relationships, which I find really sort of inspiring in its humanity. And the other one, which is a bit of a curious one, is a mega biography of Lyndon Johnson I've just read by a guy called Robert Caro. Lyndon Johnson was not a great guy, but he was actually instrumental in helping the civil rights movement in the States. And in this book, it describes the absolute horrible discrimination and persecution that people of colour in the States experienced, and to a degree still experience. And their bravery was absolutely, which came through in this book, was absolutely inspirational in the face of absolutely horrible persecution. So there's a couple.
That sounds amazing. They're added to my list. This is the problem with doing this question. I've got a reading list now that's like 40 books long. So what is your favourite comfort food?
Chocolate.
Chocolate. Yes. I'll go with you on that one. What's the weirdest thing that you've ever done?
Well, I was thinking about this. The most recent weird thing I ended up doing the other week was getting into the Mail Online, standing next to Daenerys Targaryen, the mother of dragons, from Game of Thrones fan. Emilia Clarke came along to a wonderful fundraising event, and it was brilliant, but a very weird moment that did my credibility with my family no end of good.
I can imagine. Your kids are now like, "Oh, Dad, you're so cool." Amazing. Where's your favourite place that you've ever visited?
For me, Lake District. It's we've got family connections there, loads of wonderful holidays with my lovely parents, sadly now passed on. So rather special place as far as I'm concerned.
Oh, it's a beautiful place, the Lake District. Absolutely beautiful. Are you a dog person or a cat person?
Well, I was a cat person, but we're thinking of becoming dog people, Margaret, my wife, and I. So a bit of a change going on there.
I absolutely recommend being a dog person. So much
fun. Sounds good.
Scariest thing that you've ever done?
Ooh, funnily enough, it was probably going along to one of a birthday party my daughter went to at Go Ape. Do you know Go Ape? It's kind of aerial kind of things. I get vertigo.
Oh no!
Scary.
Wow. So for anybody listening that doesn't know what Go Ape is, it's kind of like, how would you explain it? Like an assault course in the top of a tree's kind of
thing. Yeah.
Very high up, very, very scary. especially with Virgo. What is your favourite hobby?
Ooh, at the moment it's kite surfing, which I've just taken.
Okay, that's random.
Good fun, yeah. So I was down at Hayling Island on the south coast last weekend. My first kite of the season. Really good fun. Very exciting.
Oh wow, I'll try that. Is there a hobby that you've always wanted to try out?
Ooh, yeah, no, that's a difficult one. I'm gonna have to pass on that one. There are load of things I'd like to do. We'll come back to that one at the end.
Okay, that one is the end.
Oh, well, there you go. Sorry.
That's all right.
I should have come better prepped on that one. Excuse me.
That's fine. Don't worry about it. So where can warriors find out more about you and what you do?
So what I'd suggest is go to the MS Society website. There's a lot about the stuff we're doing. Very keen as an organisation to connect with you all. But equally, if if you've got questions or stuff, do feel free to just email me, contact me direct, and really happy to see what I can do to respond.
Fabulous. Very good. Well, thank you so much for coming on our show today, Nick. It's been an absolute honour to have you here today.
Well, thank you so much. That's lovely to make the connection. Lovely to be able to talk to you, Jessie, and all your listeners. So really, really nice. Thank you. I very much appreciate it.
Oh, no, thank you. And you connect with Nick, as he mentioned, on the MS Society website. So go and check that out, warriors. And remember, stay enabled. Okay, thanks, Nick. Bye.
Right. Take care.
If you want to fight back against your invisible illness and help take the dis out of disability, then join the tribe on Facebook, facebook.com/enabledwarriors. If you love this podcast, click that subscribe button and never miss another episode. And remember, warriors, stay enabled.